Welcome to the CE Pro podcast. I'm Executive Editor Arlen Schweiger. When it comes to the latest in 4K and 8K home video, there's a lot happening these days, so CE Pro editor Bob Archer gathered Joel Silver of the Imaging Science Foundation, Jason Dustal of Meridio, and Robert Zohn of Value Electronics, a New York-based integrator, for a two-part podcast. This week, they cover HDMI 2.1 and its impact on the industry, and the CEDIA CTA-RP28 System Design and Verification Recommended Practice Guide, which was jointly developed by CEDIA and the Consumer Technology Association. As always, be sure to subscribe to CE Pro's YouTube channel and hit that like button on our videos, or subscribe to the CE Pro podcast on Apple and Spotify and leave a review.
Hi, I'm Bob Archer, Senior Editor of CE Pro Magazine. Today, I have a who's who of the consumer video industry with me today for the CE Pro podcast. I'm Joel Silver from the Imaging Science Foundation. I have Jason Dustal from Meridio. I have Robert Zohn from Value Electronics here today, and we're going to talk about what's new in home video. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Bob.
Greetings. How are you?
Great. Thank you, guys. We got a lot to cover, almost like Smokey and the Bandit in a short time to get there. So with that being said, I want to get right into the my questions, because we do have a lot to talk about, including a new CEDIA CTA standard. So picking up where we had left off from a podcast earlier this year, a lot has happened since we spoke this past spring. CEDIA and CTA have introduced most recently an HDMI system design and verification standard. Why is this standard important to integrators? Joel, could you kick things off?
Well, I'll be happy to, because this is 2.5 years of my life, and Jason Dustal is with us, and virtual who's who of the digital video domain. And the critical part of this is, if you do not understand what the game is in HDMI, be prepared to run the truck to the customer's houses again and again and again. And this is a different version of HDMI than everything else before, because this was a scenario where the boy who cried wolf was right every time. New HDMI is coming, we're in trouble. New HDMI is coming, we're in trouble. Well, this one is going to fix a lot of the troubles. This is a very different scenario. This is what we've been aiming at for a long time. So the 2.1, if I give a generic recommendation, make everything in your systems 2.1 and live happily ever after. This is going to resolve some problems, some chronic things we've been suffering with forever, like lip sync. And Jason, I know you've been on calibrations with lip syncs, and all my calibrators around the globe tell me that after they finish getting the picture looking great, the lip sync drives them nuts. And ALS, auto lip sync, is going to be part of this specification. And you probably have all seen that eARC, Enhanced Audio Return Channel, is now a big part of what we do. And of course, that came from the need for getting the audio to go backwards down the HDMI cable. And when we started streaming from the TV set, it wasn't an option, it was critical. And now we've got lots of advanced audio coming over the streams. I've got to get that backwards down the HDMI into my surround sound system, whatever it may be. So what we found, and I'll give you the genesis of this. Jason and I are on the road together training calibrators. We've covered millions of miles, brought in over 7,000 people into the fold, doing great jobs. And Robert Zohn's a classic case. He's a conscientious calibrator the majority of the sets. He gets his hands on, he calibrates for clients, and he's always scrambling for more help because he's always getting behind, which is normal if you're doing a good job at retail. But what we found training calibrators, and we went over 2 years without a system success for a 3-day environment. And here's our system. I've got a laptop, a Blu-ray player, a generator, and usually some type of server device to have a lot of movies on, feeding into a switch, going to 8 to 10 to 12 monitors, very much like a multi-room system in a home. And the company Jason was working with was repping a number of products, so he kept mixing and matching, but we would have trouble with the setup day. And then as I'm switching from PC for my test instruments, for my Blu-ray player, whatever the source was, I'd switch back and forth, I'd lose sync. Jason, remember the days of pulling your hair out, everyone's hair on fire, having to restart the system, countless times.
Yeah, and it was really fun when we're right in the middle of presenting something, and all we're doing is trying to switch sources just to show somebody something new, and the system falls apart. It's kind of embarrassing, to be honest.
Well, embarrassing for us to a small degree, embarrassing for a dealer when the customer is sitting here with his accountant, his lawyer, and his best friend saying, I had HDR yesterday. I don't know why it's not HDR today. It was fine yesterday. Or there's no picture, or the picture is green or pink or purple, and it's got snow on it and dancing things, and a myriad of systems. So we went to Jason's company and about 8 or 10 other companies. We said, what are your top problems? Give me your top 10 problems. And we structured the course around fixing these problems. And then when we started to write the new home video system standard, one of the things we're adding, and everyone on this call right now is going to be with me on that standard. It's going to be great. I've got a power pack committee. The committee's job was going to be updating the old home theater standard. And the first thing we had to update was HDR. And we hit the pause button. So how can I write a standard on calibrating, installing, integrating HDR if I can't turn it on and keep it on? So we paused the committee, which will finally come to life next month and a month after, and started an HDMI committee because we said, okay, job one is calibrating HDR. The hardest part about HDR calibration is turning it on and keeping it on. So 2.5 years later, we finally have the specs from HDMI. We wrote it up. All CEDIA members get it for free. HDMI system design and verification. It's a milestone for the industry, and I got to tip my hat to the HDMI guys. They really did a good job this time. So if you get a hold of the standard, I'll tell you, first off, read the introduction, because it talks about the complexity of it. It's just a paragraph. Read the scope, another paragraph, and then go read the glossary. Jason, how much trouble did we have getting the glossary finally finished?
Oh, I mean, it went through several revisions, and a lot of that stuff was kind of handwritten by me, and it took a lot of research, and it probably went through 3 or 4 revisions before we were all happy with it.
And some of the revisions came from a term. I had some people from Quantum Data. We had Dolby people, Crestron people, radio people, you name the major manufacturer of distribution gear, they contributed, so I got to thank them. And every time we come up with a solution for a problem, there was a term that one of the triple E engineers was using, and I'm saying, wait a second, that's not English. What are you talking about? So we ended up enhancing the glossary because someone would tell us, well, I've got to assert and deassert the system. And I said, excuse me, assert, deassert? What are you talking about? They go, oh, well, connect and disconnect. I said, well, why don't you call it connect?
Just say that, yeah.
They said, well, the engineering term is, and your readers are going to see this from time to time on an HDMI dock. I said, you've got your own language. That's right. It's a standards language for HDMI. Well, our job is to translate that to someone in the field who's got a customer who needs to have a reliable system. And the goal of the system, and this is a word I've never heard used with HDMI before, the goal of the system was to make a robust HDMI system, which until 2.1, Jason, would you say it was an oxymoron?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So in 2.1, you can get a robust system. Now, the system adds another live cable. We're repurposing one of the other HDMI's 19 cables to handle video. So Jason, how many channels do we have now for video?
So for HDMI 2.1, we went from 3 TMDS channels to 4 FRL channels just by repurposing that 4th TMDS line, which was actually a clock signal. So we were able to embed the clock into the FRL, and now we have 4 lanes, and now we can go nice and high bandwidth, 48 gigabits per second.
And for what we're testing now, we're finding live software coming your way is probably going to be the 32 to 40 gig for the foreseeable future. I don't see 48 coming your way quickly. So a lot of the products hitting the market are going to be at 32, which I'm worried about, at 40, which I'm less worried about. 48 is going to be a reach, and you don't need it quite yet.
Well, and
40 is going to be the goal.
Don't forget too that there's only like 3 or 4 formats over 40 gigs anyway. So I've been telling people too lately, like, don't worry about the 48 quite yet. We've still got plenty of time to grow into it.
I mean, maybe 5 to 8 to 10 years, but the 40 is going to be fine. So the big kicker that I see coming, it's going to light this thing on fire, is not movies. We've already got movies to the point where I can get at 24 pictures per second everything I want out of a movie in color, in resolution. What's going to kick it all off, we're going to do to sports watching what we already did with movie watching, revolutionize it. Now, we've been watching 60 pictures per second in the USA since the World's Fair by Robert up in New York, in Queens, when they had launched in 1939 60 pictures per second NTSC, based, of course, on the speed of the electricity in your wall, which is why the European systems were 50. So they're going to go to 100 in Europe. We're going to go to 120. So if it's 120 for real, not 120 make-believe because some chip for $3 up-converted in a TV set made it look like a soap opera. This is a camera feed on sports at 120. And that's dramatically better. So the term I want people to take from this particular download of information is temporal resolution. Spatial resolution is how many pixels up and down, left and right. That's important, but temporal is much more important. So Jason, tech question for the audience. Hate to put you on the spot. Would you rather have 4K 120 sports or 8K 60 sports?
4K 120 all day.
It took them a long time to answer that, right?
Yeah, I mean, all day.
This was sports. Now, go to a movie like The King's Speech, you don't need 120. And when will we start seeing major movies in 120? Maybe never, because the culture and the look and the feel of the film format is taught in every film school on the planet, and it's romantic, it's not real, it's film. And that look we like, we're used to, but I don't want that at my tennis match watching US Open. And we did have the privilege of watching a European standards company show the future. And since we have part of the world at 50, part of the world at 60, the only number that really works for the whole planet, we can't do yet, and that's 300 hertz. That'll be for the next generation of video files after we're all gone, and that'll unite the planet. But the 120 is such a huge step that when you go back to 60, it's going to look fuzzy. And that's where your 18 gig system is going to blow up. Because Jason, what are you measuring when you're looking at, even 4K 120 to blow up the 18 gig?
Oh, 4K 120, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, that's way over 18 gigs.
Yeah, so you're going to see capture at 8K 120 and distribution down res to 4K, which is still going to be glorious, but keep the 120. So that's next year's business. And if you want to be successful in an industry, you just have to be able to read tomorrow's headlines. So we know when Robert does a demo in his store of a TV playing some sporting event, Super Bowl with 60 on one picture, 120 on the other, Robert's going to be a slam dunk. It's going to be like an HDTV moment where people go, what? And you're going to go, well, that's what you're watching at home. Here's the new one. And you're going to run out of inventory immediately. And at that point, you'll change the AVRs, you'll change the cables. So if we're putting things in now, generic recommendation from the HDMI committee has been since its inception, conduit. If you ask me what cable to put in, I will tell you, I think I have a handle out to about 2024. But after that, I want a conduit, because the ultimate job of a cable that Robert's putting in someone's home right now is going to be a wire pole for the next generation of cable. And he's doing that right now. He's ready for it. So you want to have systems that are designed for upgrades. But Jason, is fiber getting more common?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been talking about it now for 4 or 5 years, but people are really starting to implement it in normal jobs. And I do want to say one thing too about the HDMI and fiber conversation. There are cables out there that are hybrid fiber copper cables, usually known as AOC cables. And one thing that we're really excited about with those is, let's say there is a system where one of those cables is installed and there is no conduit. Well, we're at a point now where, at least for some manufacturers of those cables, you can lop off the end and you've got 3 pieces of fiber or 4 pieces of fiber in there. So, a lot of this stuff, we like to say future resistant, but that's going to really help out a lot in the next, 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
So you're advocating then not buying pre-terminated cables, putting in fiber and terminating yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then when the next generation comes along, just lop off the source and the sink ends, put on 2 new ends, and you're ready to go.
Ready to rock, yep.
And just a normal everyday, there are different levels of fiber, these optical multi-mode, and the levels have to do with the clarity of it. And you've got OM1, optical multi-mode 1, 2, and Jason, I've seen you recommend 3 and up for people. Is that correct?
Yeah, what we normally see in those AOC cables, of course, those are, dozens of meters and maybe 100 meters at most. They usually typically use OM2, and for that kind of application, that's fine. But when we're doing like whole house distribution and pre-wiring and things like that, we usually recommend to folks to do OM3 at minimum. There's not a very big jump after OM3. It kind of becomes diminishing returns, if you want to call it that. But OM3 should be like where you start, going forward from today.
Yeah, and eventually we'll go up to OM5, which will be multicolored laser, where I can actually take, with a prism, divide up the light into multi-bandwidths based upon the actual wavelength of the light and give you 20 cables inside one fiber. And the application for that is not home. The application for that is serious industrial bandwidth issues, hospitals and others. But OM3 is going to take you a long, long ways. And it's not expensive. The difference in cost between OM2 and OM3 is negligible when you're putting it together. So you're putting a house together, pull the cables. I actually recommend 2, as I've always done, because you've got people with nails and picture hanging and things. Staples. So I like running a duplex, run something that looks like a lamp cord with 2 wires. I like redundancy. Again, not expensive. Run that in and you got a second path for no money, which is great. But then you terminate it, you're fine. So at that point, we'll be able to deliver signals for the foreseeable future. And again, the 120 is going to be the big one. That's going to change things. And right now, what we've got is a remarkable time for our business. We've got high dynamic range content coming at us on disks, which I love dearly, but no one buys disks really in volume anymore. Servers, which I think are a big part of the future, because I can download disk quality audio and video onto a server, and my client doesn't have to leave his chair to change the disk if he could actually find the right disk in the right jacket or find the jacket. I love server-based entertainment. And streaming, which, I'll go public and say at this point, I'm actually watching a lot of streaming. And I would have been embarrassed to say that not too many years back, but when we threw HDR onto it, and with the preponderance of good video signals coming into a streaming environment, with a huge number of Americans getting high bandwidth signals, we've got some good looking streaming, which is like something I wouldn't have thought possible. And now we're looking at first run for the home, and we have to say thank you to a pandemic for that, because we did 10 years worth of progress in 5 months, because we've been trying to get first run movies to the home forever. And companies have laid waste to fortunes building products, launching products, then failing. But I've got for $30 mainstream movies that I can play for 8 to 10 kids. So it's a blast. And we've got great content. And on the TV side, and Robert's business shows this, we've got something we never had in TVs before at any reasonable budget. I think Jason would call it contrast. You've got decent blacks, blasting whites, because in a world of 100 nit TVs, which we had for a million years, I had Jason complain to me the other day. He's got this reasonably priced TV. He can only get 600 nits out of it, and it was cheap. I mean, he goes, only 600 nits. I want more.
That's it.
Guy, you used to spend 5 times more than that for 100 nits.
For sure.
And since the content's been made at 1,000 nits, Jason, when you were measuring things at the shootout, anything at 1,000 nits?
Oh yeah, there was several displays there that were over 1,000 nits.
Okay, so if playing the content back at the same level of light it was mastered in?
No big deal. Easy peasy these days.
Okay, so that's going to be the essence of our standard for home video. You shall play the content back the way it was created. Now, this doesn't sound very complicated, but in a world of 1,000 nit and 4,000 nit content, I don't want a 400 nit TV set. And in a world of P3 color, which is spectacular compared to our 1990 color. So Jason, I keep picking your brain because you did a great job in the shootout. How many of the sets there could actually do the P3 gamut, the whole triangle?
If I could interrupt you guys for a second,
yeah, sure.
I'd like to hold off on the shootout commentary. I do have a question about that.
I was just trying to tie it in together with the HDMI.
Okay.
We are now
I do want to hit the shootout. I do have some questions about that. So
I wanted to take it from an academic document talking about delivering full bandwidth to real life, where I've got inexpensive sets that require the bandwidth. So it's no longer the state-of-the-art TV where I'm looking for 40 gig cables. It's going to be all the TVs in the not too distant future. Now it's most of the better TVs. So the shootout is just a recent demo publicly confirming that we can now reproduce the content the way the artist intended. And that has been the basis of our company since we started. We just want to bring into your home what the colorist, the cinematographer, the director, and the producer saw in the studio. I don't want a blue version, green version, darker, brighter, whatever. I want on my screen what Spielberg saw on his screen when he signed off on his creation. And we dreamed about that. We got there with 709 and we got there with 100 nit TVs, and we stayed there for quite some time. And when we went to 4K, UHD, HDR, we got behind again. We got behind for 6 years, maybe 7. In fact, the earliest 4K TVs wouldn't do HDR at all. They were 4K, but they wouldn't do HDR. So the connectivity part here became critical. And Mr. Arch, that's the first thing you asked me. Why is it critical? Well, number one, the content demands it. The customer demands it. And the other thing they demand is for it to be robust. And this business of, turning on one TV that's not HDR and shutting the whole house down for HDR until the dealer got back there, and repeating that until the dealer was ready to pull his hair out, that's the distant past that we called last year. And it's still happening out there. So legacy cables are still bothering us. Legacy AVRs are bothering us. Legacy switchers, distribution amps, all these legacy products that don't handle high bandwidth signals create massive time sinks and losses for all of our installers globally. So the question, why is it important? Well, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to lose your shirt. You're going to be back to that customer's house so many times, you're not going to need a GPS. You're going to memorize the path there. And if he doesn't throw you out, his wife will, and the kids will scream at you because it doesn't work. You can't have that this day and age. Products have to be robust. So it took us 2.5 years to write the spec on this. We sweated bullets on this. We tested things. And Jason, we just did a session at CEDIA, and we had 10 TVs hooked up. And I think it was actually kind of dull. We just plugged them in and switched, and it kind of worked.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It was almost boring.
I mean, someone tripped over a cable and we lost one TV. That happened. But I mean, nothing happened other than, I hate to use the term plug and play because we used to call it plug and pray. We just plugged it in and it worked. So, Robert, this is where we were and this is where we are. So that 2.1 document is a critical thing to understand and read, because if you don't know what is required, and with the communication happening between what HDMI calls a source and a sink, when you plug something in and a signal goes into a device, HDMI calls it a sink. I might call it a TV. You plug into a TV and the TV communicates backwards down the HDMI and a handshake happens. Now, we've had this handshake in audio forever, because when I plug in a $300 AVR to a Blu-ray player, it knows whether the disc is DTS in all its flavors or Dolby in all its flavors. And there's no panic, it just happens. Now, in TV, we complicated it. We call it metadata, and then it doesn't work. And then sometimes it works. It's just sync. There's a signal that goes along with the content to tell the TV what to do. And if the TV can't do it, the content has to be shortchanged.
Yeah.
Now, Jason, we saw that FRL you were talking about. What's the acronym again? Fixed rate link. Okay, and do we have training for that too? Can the system actually figure things out as it's being connected?
Yeah, and this is what's one of the great things about it is it'll fall back to something that does work. So a lot of these issues of like flashing picture, no picture, and all the things that we're seeing today probably aren't going to be too much of an issue going forward.
Will it even sync way back to a 3 cable system rather than 4 if it needs it?
Yeah, that's what the nice thing is. It's if something in the system doesn't support FRL, then it'll fall back to TMDS and boom, everything's working, everybody's happy.
And the dealer and the customer don't have to see this. They just plug it in and it figures it out.
It's all happening on the back end. It's all happening on the internals. They never even know it's working, but it works.
Now, a big part of training that Jason and I used to do is to teach dealers how to turn on the input so that HDR would happen. And Robert, you live with this. You had to actually go into the home, and if you had an HDR source, different manufacturers called it different things. You'd have to turn things on, or the HDR never happened. And Jason and I were in a session with 3 pre-production pieces from a manufacturer. We plugged in an Apple TV, and the TV had a message. It said, "Excuse me a second, I need a moment. I'm turning on the HDR input." We went, "What?"
Yeah.
What? It did it for us.
Yeah.
And that was step 1 in making HDR work. You don't have to manually go through 7 pages of menu to go external input, number 2, turn on HDR. It now happens automatically. So more and more of this. Now, if it finds the system has one part of it that won't handle the HDR the way you want it to, it'll turn itself into a 2.0 system, not a 2.1, without you being involved. So Robert won't get a phone call at night. I just switched from Apple TV to Netflix, and the HDR didn't light up. It will just work. So this was a major accomplishment, and I think it was November 2017 where they announced the specification for 2.1 was coming, and 4 to 5 years later we got it, which is not unusual because chipsets have to be working, cable labs have to be set up. This took some time, but we're here now. So back to Mr. Archer's first question, why is this important? Well, if you're in the business or you're a hobbyist and you want things to work, and you want to be able to just pick content and play it the way it was delivered to you, your HDMI system has to be designed properly. And we talk about the document saying design and verification. I don't want to verify. I want to design, plug it in, make it work, and walk away. If it doesn't, then I have to verify. So Jason, if you're in an install, you have a generator in your hands, and the system's all put together, would you test all the formats?
Oh,
all the
for sure.
resolutions?
Yeah, that's what's nice about the test equipment is that
All the
you're
frame
holding,
rates?
yeah, you're holding in your hand, you put one of these little generators in place of the source and just try everything and see if there's a failure. And if there is a failure, you can take the generator, go to the next thing in the signal chain and pump through that way. And eventually, going device to device to device, you'll find the one that's causing you problems. But yeah, that's the beauty behind it.
And the other beauty, these devices from Quantum Data, which are wonderful devices. Most of the manufacturers I work with in our labs, Jason's company has a bunch of Quantum Data gear. It's reference, but you're talking $10, $12, $14,000 and you don't carry it around in your pocket. We needed a small portable device that would do 90% of what the lab gear does. And that's now available. Jason, is it somewhere around $2,000 now?
Yeah, the 6G, that's our little handheld portable generator you're referring to, and they come in right around like $24.95, and we do have an 8K version of that now as well. That's a little bit more just because it's the chips are a little bit more money, but we're still in that like $3,000 maximum price point.
And you can verify your
all
systems
day,
this way.
all day.
Now, here's where HDMI comes from, Mr. Archer. From the HDMI standpoint, they look at the TV set sitting on a counter, and next to it are 3 devices, generally a gaming system, a cable or satellite system, and some type of disc player. One gets plugged in with a 1-meter cable into input 1. The second one goes to 2, and the third one goes to 3. That's the HDMI system designed from HDMI to begin with. They were never envisioning that I'd have a rack in the room and sending the signal to 5 different rooms, or I'd have a server and 5 people would have menus and I'd be delivering it to multiple places, or I would put it on the wall and now I've got a 10-foot single cable and I don't want to pull 3 or 5 cables through the wall. I want one. And we have an AVR. So we grew from a point-to-point system with the boxes next to the TV into a system we just saw that's going to win some CEDIA awards, where we had a 40-seat theater, 32 channel sound in one room, and 15 other rooms to get video. And at this point, sky's the limit. I shouldn't say that. I think 32 channels was the limit for the preamp they're using in that one. They maxed out at 32 channels, which could keep most people happy. But we've now got robust systems, but you have to design it properly. And before you leave the house, hand the customer remote. You've got to go through every combination of signals, every box to make sure it works, turn everything on and off a few times, and then you have documented that it's robust and you go home. So Robert, that's why we think it's important. You have to be able to go into a home, get the install done, and then send the guy a disc in a few weeks that you found he likes so he can watch with his wife and have a good time, not go back 16 times because the system doesn't work. That was yesterday's news. So this document is to close out yesterday's news. HDMI 2.1 is to close out yesterday's brief. So this particular revision, the boy who cries wolf is wrong. This one, don't worry about this one. This one's going to fix a lot of the problems we had before. So sorry for a long answer for a good question, but this one you want. And you want this in every component you install from now on. I wouldn't consider putting anything in a new component if it wasn't 2.1.
Okay, let me ask this to Robert. Since you're a dealer and you're dealing with a vast array of clientele in their homes, installing these products and these systems, why is a standard important? for you, and how does it help you in your business and other dealers?
Thank you. The standard is important for a lot of what Joel said. It's for reliability of the system. The system will perform with all different formats and all different configurations if everything is compliant to HDMI 2.1, everything in the circuit. And then you'll have a trouble-free system. So that's one of the reasons. The other is you want to see the full dynamic tonal range. You want to see 100% of the color volume. You're not going to see that unless we have a fully compliant system. So for you to have all the emotion that these filmmakers put into the content, for you to see their intent in your home, you have to have a fully compliant system. And you need your technicians well trained on it. So I was fortunate to get a copy of Joel's document that Jason and so many other professionals worked on. We gave it to our technicians. We asked them to spend time reading it and learning it. And then I popped questions to them that were relevant to the content that was created there to test them on their skill and knowledge of this document. It's important for all dealers to do that. So I don't know if I answered you correctly, or if you want more. There's a lot more information on this I can give you.
No, it brings to mind a great question. Joel, how important is it for dealers to familiarize themselves with the CEDIA, CTA verification standard and the HDMI 2.1 standard?
Well, I think if you want to be able to have a bottom line that's profitable, you can't be going back to the house 3 or 4 times. It's what you've done before. We've all seen cases of this. I've been asked to be an expert witness for litigation. I've turned it down. Like, we had a strange story with a lawyer in town who I actually know, and he said, "Would you come into court? I know what your day rate is, and just testify that this shouldn't happen." And I went, "No, I don't want to do that. That's no fun. Why don't I just go to the house and I'll fix what's wrong?" And the lawyer's comment was hysterical. He goes, "How does that help me?" I said, "Well, wait a second. I fix problems." He goes, "I sue people." I go, "Well, I don't want to get involved. And no matter what you pay me per day, I'm not going to court for something silly. There's obviously something wrong in this home." And we ended up fixing it. And the lawyer was funny, but people are angry when it doesn't work. It's a toy. It's supposed to work. And Robert, sometimes you get a defective component, and this happens from time to time. And one of the things that Robert's store has an edge up on other people, if you're taking something out of the box and you're running it for a while and breaking it in and calibrating it, a significant number of failures happen right off the bat. He intercepts it before it gets to a customer's home. He's got it running properly before it gets to a customer's home. It's been hooked up to components before it gets to the home. So this understanding of the HDMI document is one of 3 legs of a nice little stool that I'll point out. 1, be able to turn the system on and off. 2, make it sound good, which is CEB 22, the audio design committee, which is finished. They're just waiting for approval. And the 3rd is the one we're about to start. And that's the update of home video standards. So you need to be able to make it work, sound good, look good, take the check and go home. And it's not supposed to be more complicated than that. And as far as the audio side, I'm redoing my audio system on Monday. I've been waiting a long time to do it. And part of it's gear I'm getting from the people who I sort of volunteered to chair the audio committee, but my installer has read the doc. He's been part of it. So I'm comfortable with what's happening in audio, and the video system's been redesigned. The audio's been designed. These are golden days for dealers. And in the midst of a pandemic, my guys on the residential side are happy. Now, Jason just trained 15 people on the studio side, tediously, one-on-one with virtual. We have a 11-module online course with CEDIA. That's a prerequisite to do the virtual hands-on course. And we had colorists in the studio who normally depend upon ISF guys to come in and calibrate the monitors. The ISF guys are not allowed on site. They're not employees. So these colorists, who tend to be fussy, tend to be prima donnas, tend to be demanding sons of bitches, and they should be because they're responsible for the look of the movie. They're used to calling a calibrator, getting the thing done at 6 to 8 in the morning. They walk in at 9 o'clock, it's all done. They had to do their own. And so Jason was up against the wall with these guys, and they took the online, and 15 people, 2 days at a time. Jason lived with Zoom and whatever and got them operational. And one guy actually who's been in trouble, I called him. I said, "Oh, how's the program to work? He goes, should have done it 10 years ago. I can do this myself. I don't have to wait for someone to come in. I want it done now. Now I do it. So yes, they had to buy him 20 grand worth of gear, and he had to take a few days worth of training, but he controls his own destiny. Mm-hmm. So the studio side is hard pressed to keep up because the calibrators can't walk in. The areas in Manhattan, we've got so many post houses that one of my guys works in steadily, and that part of his business has been fractured. He can't get in. Thankfully, the residential side of his business has him booked out 3 months.
Yep.
So the studio side has gone by the wayside because we can't get into facilities, and some of the studios still aren't fully opened yet. And they're all under pressure because content demand from streaming services is out of sight. They want it tomorrow. But the residential side, projectors are selling like never before. We're seeing big screens at ridiculously low numbers, selling like never before. Robert, what's your average size now? Do you see 65s or 77s? You know?
No, it's all 77 and up, actually.
Okay, yeah. So that's been a revolution.
Yes.
And we're even seeing it in the UK, where the UK has been way behind us. We do a lot in the UK. And they were hesitant to go to 65 from the 58s. And they blew right by the 77 just like we did. And they were saying our homes can't handle it. We have little rooms. We don't have rooms like Americans. Well, the beauty of 4K and 8K is you don't need a big room. I can put an 88-inch in a small room with 4K, and with 8K, you put 100-inch in the bedroom, it's fine. You can sit very close to these things, and they don't fall apart. So big screens are selling. The 77 is on the verge of becoming a commodity.
Yeah.
And I see them in Costco.
Number one seller is 83 to 85 inch. That's
nice.
That's the number one seller.
Very
so
cool.
the 77 is the new 65.
That's correct.
It's a commodity TV. But I'm seeing the OLEDs in the $2,000 range, which is amazing.
Isn't it? Yeah.
We're throwing it in bedrooms. It's a bedroom TV now. It's a guest room TV. And the 77s, the 83s. Can you get any volume on the 88, Robert? Is that available now, or is that still tight?
They're very hard to get, and they're still high priced, but we are selling them fairly well. That's correct.
If you get more, you'd sell more. I hear that all over.
Also correct, yes.
So, Mr. Archer, our business in the field, thankfully, in this particular worldwide pandemic that's taken so much from the planet and so many lives and so many businesses terribly disrupted. I'm a traveler. I normally do between 150 and 220,000 miles a year. I'm not doing anywhere near that. I'm not traveling to manufacturers anymore. So hotels, restaurants, Uber services, so many people are suffering that we're on the fortunate side of high-end home entertainment where our business is thriving and Netflix is thriving. Disney Plus is raking in things, HBO Max, all these services are knocking out beautiful content and people have time to watch it. So it's no mystery. They say, my audio can be better, do it. My TV is too small, get me a bigger one. My projector's too dim, get me an HDR one. So, Robert, is that what you're seeing in the field?
Absolutely, yes. And just to make sure that I answered Bob Archer correctly, you want to be sure, dealers want to be sure that their technicians are well trained on all the HDMI 2.1 standards and everything that it takes. The source material, the content is exceptional today. The televisions and the projectors are also exceptional. They're brighter, they're bigger, they do a better job of processing, they do a better job of color. Everything is better. Everything in between that circuit also has to be perfect. So we need HDMI 2.1 pass-through to be accurate, reliable, and full bandwidth.
Please use the word robust, because I can never use it before.
You
want to leave the customer with a robust system. It's going to work all day, every day.
Correct. And as you said, even streaming is better today. And processing is so good that you don't see all the anomalies of streaming and compression. They clean it up in the processor so nicely.
Well,
so
you hit it on the head, Robert. Streaming quality being lacking in the not too distant past, but the state of it a few years ago drove every manufacturer I worked with to up the investment in processing. To reduce the noise, make the picture palatable. So the processing got better because streaming wasn't as good as it was today. Now we have better streaming. The processor takes it up another level. So you could take the same piece of glass from 3 different manufacturers and you get 3 different end pictures because the processing is part of it. And we've been doing this for a long time. Ages ago, I had a very dear client, Mr. E. Ferrugia.
Right.
And we spent a lot of time with Eve. He taught me a lot. He was one of the great geniuses of our time. He's one of these guys, you go have dinner with him, you sit in the room, you breathe the same air, you leave smarter. Just
That's
being with him. But his eye for processing was amazing. And people used to yell at him, Eve, HD is coming, you're out of business, I'm not going to need your processors anymore. And he'd sit there and we'd be buying dinners because he was having trouble making payroll in the early days. And he's saying, they don't get it. When HD TV comes, every TV is going to have a processor in it. If I could just stay in business long enough to survive until HD TV comes, I'm going to be rich, really rich. Well, he did, and he did. And unfortunately, they gave him an NDA when he sold his company. He can't play with us guys anymore. He's out of the business, but he's not poor anymore. But the processing now, every TV in the world has to have a processor.
fantastic. Yes.
And that doesn't mean it has to have a good one. And the investment in good processing is significant. And the decisions in processing, whether you can preserve every bit of detail and let noise through or hide the noise and lose some detail at the same time, some of these decisions are philosophical. They're not purely engineering. There's a stylistic way of looking at things. How much noise will you tolerate for how much resolution do you want? How much resolution will you lose when you take away some of the video noise? And everybody in processing is leaning now more towards preserving the resolution because the noise on the streaming is way down because the quality is better. Now, that's here in the States. That's not global. There are plenty of markets where bandwidth to the home is still primitive. And there are states here, I've got friends in Montana who are in the business, who miss it, who don't have good bandwidth coming to their home yet. They see a country club across the street with fiber and they're dealing with rusty old copper someplace. So the states are doing great. So the processing here, part of the reason, and Robert hit it, part of the reason your sales are so good, Robert, is the signal's good.
Yes.
And it comes with killer audio too.
Yeah. I have to say too that I mean, it was bound to happen, right? You know, we've been dealing now with, you know, very high quality music streaming for several years now. And it was kind of bound to happen with video. It just took a little longer because there's a lot more bits than there was with audio.
It takes a bigger pipe, a more robust pipe. And my particular neighborhood, we replaced 1,200 homes with fiber. And reliability on my internet is a different world. And, you know, I'm at $30 a month for somewhere between 440 and 500 meg for $30. And for another $30, I can get gigabyte, but I don't need anything that's over 500. Nothing approaches what the limit of my bandwidth is. If I'm getting something at 70, I'm excited, but that's not common. So anything over 100 is going to deliver most of what you want this week. When we go to 120, you want more. And people will pay more for sports that look better. So we're on the cusp of seeing sports happen. Unfortunately, the last Olympics in Japan was supposed to be the launch of 8K 120. And we saw more of it in the last Olympics now, but the distribution is not ready yet. You saw some of it, you saw some 120. So the pandemic has slowed that down because video production places and rebuilding facilities is going to be rough. And movie theaters, which would have played sports at 120 or 8K 120 on large theaters and rent those facilities out, that's behind and slow. And right now it's striking because Jason and I spent half of our business lifetime trying to make things look as good as the theater. And right now we're the tail that's wagging the dog. We're so far ahead of the theaters on HDR and wide color gamut and high frame rate. It's happening in the home before the theater.
Joel,
we used to react to what the theater did. We wanted to be as good as the theater. We're better. We're not bigger and we don't get it as fast sometimes, but we're better. That's never happened before. We're ahead of theatrical on HDR. And Jason, you and I were in a Dolby Vision HDR theater. Were you a little bit impressed?
Oh yeah, I mean, we were sitting next to each other and we just kept throughout the entire movie. You know, we were missing dialogue and missing parts of the movie because we were just blown away by how it looked. I mean, it was nuts.
Well, one of the things I've never seen in a movie theater before, you've heard the term fade to black, but unless you're watching a Dolby Vision theater, you fade to gray. And in my house, I fade to black. I've got TVs that have real blacks. And when I go to a regular movie theater now, the little times I go, we can rent the theater, the whole thing for not much money. Fading to gray drives me nuts now. I want that Dolby Vision 4-chip DLP that fades to black because that contrast ratio is what the eye really sees. So, you know, Robert, you have a good time because the launch of all these innovative services is not the theater right now. It's your customer's home. When you plug in a good source, and if you plug in a 100 meg per second disk or stream, you're doing much in the way of server-based entertainment in your stores?
Yes, we are. So we have Kaleidoscape, Zapedi. There's a lot of great servers right now.
Yeah, well, that's compromise free. And
Yes,
what we're seeing, if I'm looking at a 77-inch TV set from 12 feet away, the
Right.
difference between a Zapedi and a Kaleidoscape and streaming is not that critical.
I
Put
would
it on
agree.
put it on a projector or put on a
That's where it
100-inch TV
matters.
set.
Yes,
Now you demand, well, it's a high performance system, you need high test fuel. So
That's right.
for your bigger sets in smaller rooms, we have a viewing angle. The Kaleidoscapes, the Zapedis of the world, they have come of age.
absolutely.
And the fact that I can, pause, change, go through movies, download things in real time, and the quality we're getting out of some of these streaming services, it actually, in many cases, exceeds Blu-ray.
Mhm.
Because
I
they're
would-
doing,
Excuse me, guys. I would add the one difference with the server products in the streaming is the audio. The server products have
Yeah.
it all over the streaming products.
Mhm.
well, both the audio and the video. It's
And the
better
video.
video, and the audio actually, it exists. You're getting the audio that was part of the dream of the guy producing the movie, where you're getting a compromised version of it on stream. But you're getting a
Yeah.
compromised version of the picture too. On these downloads we call it asynchronous downloads. We tried to do this with Windows and Harmony, Windows 2003. We were going to download first run movies and just store it on servers way back when with Windows, and it didn't really come to pass. There was some problem with people trusting Windows environments with their first run movies. And, we still had that issue with the early days with Kaleidoscape. Man, did they have wrestling matches with studios. And now, of course, they're resellers. They're no longer wrestling. They're a customer. So studios love them. So this scenario of getting all the audio and all the video that the content creators had in mind, it really happens with the server-based entertainment. So Robert, I'm glad to hear you're doing well with it, because that's my recommendation to clients with big screens. You need to have top-notch video sources and top-notch audio sources. And Bob Archer, I mean, you and I are both audio hobbyists. Getting it in the home is hard. Putting in these large multi-channel immersive systems requires some effort. And if I'm taking that effort in my room, I want the content to make it justified.
Yes.
Which is why I'm redoing my theater on Monday. And Jason, next time he comes to the East Coast, you'll hear a much better audio system. And the audio, as you say, it wasn't bad before, right?
No, gosh, no.
It's going to be a little better.
Don't forget to turn into part 2 of the discussion next time, as CE Pro's Bob Archer and the podcast guests talked about Value Electronics' annual King of TVs shootout and the latest 4K and 8K displays. As always, be sure to subscribe to CE Pro's YouTube channel and hit that like button on our videos, or subscribe to the CE Pro podcast on Apple and Spotify and leave a review.